I wish I was back down on the port. I had some great political experiences down at the port with rallies on May Day and things in the past. So what I want to talk about in the 7 minutes is that the military-industrial complex, and we all refer to it in relation to President Eisenhower in 1961. What I want to suggest to you is, of course, that the two terms, military-industrial, are inadequate. Also, Eisenhower didn't make it up. It grew out of the anti-war movement that followed the first great slaughter and the committees in the Senate of the US that produced what is called the Nye Committee report into the Merchants of Death. And there's two chapters in that on the DuPont Corporation, the original Merchants of Death, and one on JP Morgan, the bankers who financed the British war effort. So that's a part of what we need to be aware of, this larger and wider movement. But what I want to do is to spread from where those two terms, military-industrial complex, go to a whole set of others that have made it up all the way through the 20th century and into the present. What we face is an academic, corporate, information, legislative, media military complex. All of those elements have always been there and they work out very differently across there. Now, you could write a book about each of them, and many people have. What I'm going to do is just give you a few examples of each, or one example, or one or two examples of each of them. Let's start with a recent example of the academic links in Australia. About a decade ago, 4 professors at the University of Queensland got $1.5 billion from the Australian and Queensland governments to come up with a commercially valuable quantum computer. In 2025, Nick Warner, the ex-director of the Australian Signals Information Directorate, ASIS, joined the board. They got $1.5 billion then from Lockheed Martin to engage in aerospace and warfare research. So what was commercially profitable 10 years before becomes commercially profitable once it's linked into Lockheed Martin. There are endless examples, of course, of that link between academe and the warfare industry. Now, the corporate sector. Now, we all think in terms of the armaments industry, in terms of making things, making guns and bullets and bombs. But there's another element to it that is fundamental, and that's finance. You can go back as far as you like. The Rothschilds, in fact, became the bank they are by helping to finance the British war effort against the French and Napoleon. They moved from being textile traders into being the great international financial system that we know. Now, I want to give you a couple of other examples, though. In 1942, the Americans at war, of course, set up something called the Applied Physics Laboratory to develop physical guns, improve their whole kind of ways of being able to wage war. 60 years later, in the early 2000s, they shift their emphasis to looking at capital markets in case anybody would want to use them to make an attack on the value of the US dollar dominating the world economy. And indeed, in 2009, they conduct the first financial war games, using currency and capital markets instead of ships and aircraft. Now, the other side of this, of course, is the control that the National Security Agency imposes on international financial transfers. To give you one example of this, In 2014, the French bank, BNP Paribas, was fined $9 billion for engaging in trade with banned countries, Cuba, Iran, and the Sudan. So that this power, that the complex that is America, the US warfare state, operates from, is as much financial, of course, as it is any of the other elements. And we have to keep on top of that. Now, the information part of it. This has been there since 1901, when Marconi managed to send wireless telegraphy, one word, from the United Kingdom across the Newfoundland. And then, of course, it spread into ships and submarines and aircraft, produces during the first Great Slaughter, it produces unmanned aircraft, which we now have a different name for. But the American military establishment and the acting secretary for the Navy, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, in 1918, was panic-struck that the British, the long-standing enemy of the US empire, were going to be in control of world telegraphy. So they made an attack on Marconi. In the next year or two, they forced Marconi to sell to General Electrics. And they then set up what we now know as the Radio Corporation of America, RCA. And in turn, RCA, when television comes, becomes the national broadcasting system as well. So that link between communications and warfare and finance was there all along. General Electric at the same time was being employed by the military to find a way of keeping aircraft up in the air. And they used their experience as engineers making turbines to produce electricity to make turbine engines for aircraft. And in 1942, they produced their first jet aircraft. So that those links are cross links into everything. But the big one, and the thing that I'm always a bit surprised at that people aren't aware of, is where does this magic phrase artificial intelligence come from? A lot of my friends are surprised when I tell them it was coined in 1956, 70 years ago. By whom and for what? Well, by John McCarthy at Dartmouth College. With a group of others, Marvin Minsky and that lot, they thought, how are we going to get Pentagon money away from all the funds they're giving into cybernetic research, which itself had come out of the attempts to control the projection of missiles in the Second Great Slaughter. What they did, they thought, being in America, of course, they knew you've got to have a brand. You've got to distinguish yourself from cybernetics. And so they came up with this phrase, artificial intelligence. And they promised the Pentagon that they would give them intelligent war machines. Well, even the Pentagon, after 30 years, said no more. The first AI winter descended upon the system. But this is the beginnings of how this connection between what is still talked about as the artificial intelligence movement, with this promise of what it was going to do, which is never done. And there's a technical phrase for when it's going to happen. That technical phrase is soonish. That's when it's going to happen. So the next one I want to look at is the legislative. Now, Eisenhower included congressional in military-industrial congressional complex, but he didn't want to interfere with the separation of powers, so he cut congressional out. It didn't mean to say they were cut out of the loop, of course. Senator Graham, who's just departed us, fortunately, was one of the major pushers of this in the US Senate from date away. But we have our own people here. Mike Kelly, who was a lawyer in the army, got to be major, never heard a shot fired in anger, but he was in a Labor member, and I shouldn't say Labor, there is no Labor Party, an ALP member of the federal parliament. But he resigns in 2020 on the grounds of ill health. 2 weeks later, a miracle cure. He joins Palantir as the president of Palantir Technologies Australia. And they go after more contracts using the contacts that he had made as a member of the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security. Christopher Pyne and Kim Beazley sold their services in retirement to Ernst & Young to get more defence contracts. We won't name any names of anybody who might be lining up to do the same today. And the final bit, of course, is the role of the mass media, the mass media, as we really need to understand it. And here again, I want to get a very recent example. Ellison set up Oracle as an AI company, and decades ago. He made so much money that he became, and this really surprised me, that there is such a person, the largest non-government donor to the Israeli Defense Force. Poor things, they had to go around with their hat and collect money so they could kill more people. But his son used the family fortune to buy Paramount Skydance. And then he used money from the Gulf states, those slimy lot that betrayed the Palestinians at every turn in the last couple of decades, oiled by none other than Jared Kushner, to get enough money together for Paramount to take over Netflix and beat the competitor there. Oh, sorry, to beat Netflix at taking over Warner Discovery channels.
How are we doing
that
there,
means
Humphrey?
They've now got CNN. Meanwhile, Father Ellison has taken over TikTok for 15 billion. So what we now face is that with this alliance of all these US big corporations and their influence around the rest of the world, the non-existent Zionist lobby can go from bribing journalists to owning their employers. And all
On that
of those
note,
bits
Humphrey, we
go
might need
together
to just
as the
wrap it
military
up a little.
complex. I thank you.
Excellent. Good on you, Humphrey.